everyone. My name is Dr. James, and I bring you greetings from the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. And I also want to acknowledge Dr. Jenkins, who is also here with us to celebrate our inaugural showing of our locally produced, locally created mini documentary to address the topic of microaggressions. I really want to highlight the fact that this was a multidisciplinary, multi-level, really team-based effort to make this happen. As evidenced by our panelists who are present with us tonight, who are also featured within the mini documentary. This is a complex and nuanced topic, and it can be difficult. One of the acronyms that I really appreciated that I picked up from my time at Michigan State University is entitled HALT. And I recommend it as something to consider as we watch the video, determine our responses, and participate in this discourse. And the acronym stands for, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? And it invites us to do a little self-inventory while we step into a brave space to have these conversations to help promote change. And it also reminds me to take care of myself first when you embark on something difficult. So those are just some questions to check in as we talk with each other, as we provide each other with some grace, and as we explore and come out with a new and really creative ways to see how we can make things better, not just for our patients, but for each other. So again, I want to thank you so much. You could have been anywhere else on this beautiful evening. And without further ado, let's watch the video.
The time I faced a microaggression is when a former classmate of mine decided that my name was too hard to pronounce, and so they were going to give me a nickname instead. I expressed to them I didn't appreciate this nickname and that I would rather them just at least try to pronounce my name correctly. They instead try to justify themselves by saying only their favorite people got nicknames. And I said, I don't want to be one of your favorite people. I would just want you to try to pronounce my name correctly.
I was working in clinic with a fellow, and he asked me what specialty I was interested in going into, and when I told him that I was interested in pursuing urology, he proceeded to tell me that that specialty was for men, and I was pretty frustrated because obviously it is not just for men to pursue, women can also be urologists. So I told him that, and he also proceeded to argue with me about different topics that urologists work with, for example, male infertility. He said that that was pursued mainly by OB-GYNs, which is incorrect. And when I proceeded to correct him, he was just really not believing me. So that's kind of what happened to me.
I was doing my case report presentation with a few classmates for part of our rotation, and I was in the Zoom call with everyone else, and the professor was calling on everyone to give their reports and have their discussion, and I went up and he had me go last. And at first I thought he was going because of alphabetical order or something, but as he got to me, he said, I had you go last because I couldn't pronounce your name, which I felt was kind of, I guess, rude, just because, you know, I understand that my name is not a traditional name, and I would have been more than happy to have helped him pronounce it at any point. But the fact that he just decided to push me off to the end felt kind of rude and kind of disrespectful, and that's what happened to me.
I soon realized that my concerns were being dismissed by this individual, and in my last email, I professionally and respectfully expressed my disappointment and lack of support that I felt. They were basically telling me that I don't deserve to be here. And even more disappointing because that comment came from an individual that had been privileged in this society and did not fully understand how hard I have worked to get to this point. And the fact that I was raising concerns about my own education does not make me any less grateful than anybody else. That comment was inappropriate because the person was not mindful about the challenges that minority students face to get into med school and how those words were gonna be perceived by somebody like me. We all have biases, and it's very important for us to take a step back and challenge those biases, challenge those stereotypes that we have about others.
I can recall an instance when I was in a particular rotation working at a different hospital that I did not work at daily, and I was trying to get in touch with a physician who I was working with. And I've never been to his office, and so I headed in the direction assuming where his office was, because it's close by and it's within the area of the department. And when I entered into this office, there was a receptionist there, and I asked the receptionist, I'm looking for a Dr. such and such. She asked me, do you have an appointment? And I replied, no, I do not have an appointment. She asked me one more time, well, you don't have an appointment? And I stated to her, no, I do not have an appointment. I'm here to discuss a particular case about a patient. And she looked at me and said, well, who are you? And I explained to her, well, I'm a resident. I work here. And she replied, oh, I'm sorry. I saw you here every day, and I see you with your wheelchair, and I always assumed that you were a patient. She made that assumption in spite of the fact that I was fully dressed with proper work attire, especially sporting the emblem of the hospital, and I had my ID badge on.
So a few months ago, I had a patient and I had to go interview. I went up to him, I introduced myself. I said, hi, my name is Dr. Echeverri. Nice to meet you. And without responding, he looks at me and he says, where are you from? I said, well, I'm from Florida. And he says, okay, no, where were you born? I said, I was born in Canada, actually. And he says, Canada? Why do you look so tan? So I said, we have the same sun there as we do here, I was able to then, just get through the interview. And at the end of the interview, I asked him if he had any questions. And he looks at me for a second and he says, how do you like America?
I'm also a proud gay man, although I can't say that I felt proud my whole life. In fact, growing up in a Christian home, one of my largest obstacles to pursuing a career in medicine was listening to that voice in my head that said that no normal person would want to be treated by a gay physician because gay people are perverted.
I actually had an experience in the military where I worked 6 years as a combat medic, and I was sitting in an ambulance with fellow soldiers, and one girl happened to be scrolling through her Snapchat, and she came across a joke that she shared with other soldiers but was really timid to share with me. So I asked her, what's so funny about this joke that I can't see it? And she goes, what makes a white couch dirty? And the answer was black people. So of course I was extremely offset by the joke. So I brought it to the attention of my commander, who is the higher up at my unit, and she goes, Garcia, I have 2 answers for you. 1, you shouldn't be so sensitive. And 2, if you're offset by one joke, maybe you should rethink your entire career in medicine.
So when I got into medical school, one of my roommates and I were talking about where we were from, and we got into why medicine. And then when he asked me where I came from, he cut me off before I could even start. And he's like, wait, let me guess. You were the first person born here and the first person to graduate from college in your family, right? And I told him, yeah. And he said, and so naturally, you're the first person to get into medical school too. And I was like, yeah. And then he followed that with, well, that totally makes sense as to why you're at this med school then.
It was actually during my first year as a medical student. It was the day before a big exam. Everyone was stressed, everyone was studying. And one of my classmates, very nice of them, they came up to me, and this is the white classmate. So it was a nice conversation, and then before I knew it, we got in a conversation about the African American population and medical students. And this person, they told me that they were surprised that so few African American students, black students, were still getting into medical school, that the percentage was so low still. And that actually went down. And they asked me, are these kids, and I quote, not prepared, or they believe that the number should be going up because all these schools want to fill their quote unquote quota of students. This person then went forward to ask me if I could explain it to them why the percentage of African American students in medical school is still so low. Once again, someone who didn't look like me was asking me to explain the history of systemic oppression and racism. It was not my job to do that, and it's not my job to do that because me explaining it to them would take time away from me studying for the same exam, and I don't speak for all African Americans, and it is not my job to teach someone about the way I'm treated. And I would just say that it hurt to know that someone who was one of my classmates really didn't know about these issues, or really wasn't aware of them, to not really understand why there weren't a lot of African Americans in this incoming class. It might seem small to most people, this interaction, but I'm thinking about how this made me feel, and I'm a classmate, and then this person's going to be a doctor one day, and so they may say something of a similar light to a patient. And I think that's the one thing that makes me the most upset, is that these kind of things will fly under the rug, but when it comes to the patient interaction, they can be very important, and you don't want to make a patient feel like you don't see them, even though you want to treat them.
Back when I was an undergraduate student, I used to volunteer at the Flower Hospital, and I remember one of the patients I was taking care of randomly, just like out of the blue, said to me that I remind her a lot of her granddaughter, and she said, "You also look un-American like her." And it was just so out of the blue and shocking for her to say that to me, because I think it's pretty unfair in today's day and age to label what American looks like and to think it looks a certain way, and to tell me that she thinks that I don't look American. Also in 6th grade, I remember my health teacher sort of forcing me to go by Z instead of my name Zara, because he felt that my name was really difficult. I think a lot of people of color are sort of demanded to announce where they're from. A lot of times I've had this experience, and I've seen it happen to other people of color, where you're just talking and someone will randomly demand, like, where are you from? And it's sort of like the attitude that they have behind that makes it like very rude. It makes the other person feel unwelcome and different when there's no need to feel that way. I've also gone on an elevator before and had someone say under their breath, "Did a bomb just get on?" I didn't know that they said it until later, but nevertheless, it was equally as upsetting. I've had a lot of experiences of people coming up to me with the intention of, or what I thought was the intention of complimenting me. For example, like if I'm wearing like a colorful hijab with like some design on it, they'll usually come up and say, like, oh, I really like your scarf, and then they'll like go on and like criticize my faith or my culture further. When I would go to like the grocery store, and even now, like as an adult, if I'm with my mom and my mom has an accent, if she asks the cashier something, the cashier will respond to me and not my mom, because they feel that they just assume that my mom will be able to understand. It'll just be easier to respond to me because they're assuming that I'm from here because I'm younger, so I must have been born here. I hope that if you're hearing this and you've had similar experiences, that you're able to empathize and sort of feel that, hey, I'm not alone. And if you can't relate, I hope that you're able to sympathize and learn from this video about what kinds of things are considered inappropriate or offensive and have like a negative impact on other people, because it really does change the way I've carried myself in my life. And even like as a 4 or 5-year-old, saying my name the correct way and having my classmates or having the teacher say like, what? I don't understand, because my name is actually pronounced a different way than I tell people. My name is actually pronounced Zahra, but I usually say Zara, because from such a young age I had to realize that changing little things about me to accommodate for other people in a sense who weren't willing to do the same for me was something that was definitely a challenge. There's always that opportunity to learn from these experiences, whether you're hearing about them or experiencing them.
When I think about microaggressions that I've endured, it's a little difficult to pinpoint specifics just because there are so many times that I've had to kind of deal with those kinds of situations. I will talk specifically about 2 instances that occurred when I was a student. The first was during my first year of medical school. I was in a group setting with some of my classmates, and we were talking to some PA students who were also in their first year of their education. And everybody was kind of casually discussing where they were from. People were from all over the country. And one of the students in particular talked about how he had multiple physicians in his family. His father was a physician, as were his uncles, and he told us that he had actually applied to medical school the previous year and had not gotten in, and then decided that he wanted to go to PA school instead. And then he turned to me and said that as a Black woman, it was much easier for me to get into medical school than it was for him as a white male. And then he said that I probably took his spot in medical school. And I was kind of struck by the sense that he felt entitled to the position and that somehow I did not deserve to be there as much as he did. The second instance that I will recount occurred during my acting internship while I was in the pediatric intensive care unit. And it was towards the end of my rotation. I had been there for nearly 4 weeks, and we had a patient who was coming in status epilepticus. So I walked into the unit in order to start seeing the patient. And as soon as I walked in, the unit clerk said to me, "You have to go get the seizure pads immediately. Hurry, go get them quick." And I thought, oh, perhaps the patient is seizing and is in a situation where maybe they're in the bed and they're in danger. So I ran to the supply room, and one of the nurses was in there, and I said, I was sent to come get the seizure pads, and she helped me find them, and then she said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take them over to the room." So I came back out of the supply room and then went to the back of the unit clerk desk in order to retrieve the H&P form that we were using at the time. And as I was looking for the form, the unit clerk turned to me and said, "Well, what are you doing back here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just looking for the H&P form." And she said, "Well, what do you need that for?" And I said, "Oh, I'm getting ready to go admit the patient." And she paused, and then she said, "Oh, are you our resident?" And I said, "Well, I'm the acting intern medical student." And she said, "Oh, I thought you were housekeeping. That's why I sent you to get the seizure pads." And I just looked at her for a moment, and then she tried to fix it by saying, "Well, that's what you get for wearing the same color scrubs as me." we were not wearing the same color scrubs. I think at this point, as an attending, most of what I encounter has to do with these instances of having to prove over and over again that I am who I say I am. There have been multiple occasions where I go into the room with the team and the family members will look at my medical student for confirmation because my medical student has the appearance of what they assumed the physician would be. And these are situations that occur on an almost daily and certainly on a weekly basis that I simply have to deal with in order to continue doing my job. It's exhausting.
Okay, so it's Dr. James again. I want to introduce Hanan. She is my co-moderator tonight. And I'm going to hand things over to her.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So first, I'd like to start by introducing our wonderful panelists. So I'm just going to go around. Got Paul here, Krista, Malik, Zahra, and Dr. Thomas. So they've all joined us tonight to hopefully get a discussion. We have the video that you all just saw and watched. So we have a few questions to jumpstart the video or the discussion, sorry. And then hopefully our panelists here will help us to continue this conversation as well. So the first question we have for all the viewers, what stood out to you in the video and why? So you can either type in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and share something that stood out to you and maybe why it stood out.
You want to start, Dr. Thomas, and we'll just go around and circle?
So I'll begin, and hopefully everybody can hear me. I think what stood out to me was as we were sitting here listening to the statements that were being made by the members of this panel and some others who aren't with us this evening who contributed to the video, I found it interesting how many times we kind of had an expression of affirmation or kind of having common experiences that have been shared in multiple instances. And I think what's important to remember about microaggressions is that these are common everyday events. These are the things that happen to people so often that they're usually not even brought up. And they're just kind of part of moving through life. Especially for those who are from what are considered to be minority groups in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so for me, I think the first thing I thought of while I was watching it is like each one was like a unique experience. I was like, you know, it's not like I heard every clip and it was word for word the same as the previous one, but it was almost like I was hearing the same thing again and again, because I felt like every one of those situations, like, it was just so relatable, and it wasn't something that, like, I haven't heard before, and, like, each time it's still a shock, when you experience it or when you hear about it from someone else, but I think that was, like, the most surprising thing. One is that, and then two, I felt very alone during certain parts of my life when I experienced those things. And for me, that was a very powerful video because I think it's the first time I've seen a compilation of experiences where I could say like, oh, hey, me too. That was very powerful.
I think about when Dr. Thomas said it's exhausting. Experiences that happen so often, I honestly don't even notice them anymore. It just seems like it's what you got to deal with, and it's a part of how you meet new people, unfortunately, new patients. And I think I'll never know what it's like, but I think it'll be interesting to see how much more energy I would have, how much more room I would have, thinking that I wasn't concerned about whether it was microaggressions or just safety in general in the hospital setting. what not to do because I'm black, what I should be doing, to make sure someone thinks the right thing, quote unquote, right things about me, considering I'm a black student in the hospital setting. Um, it's hard enough to be a medical student to make sure you're doing all your clerkships and impressing people and learning what you can, let alone doing it and also making sure that you're safe in it.
I will say I feel like what I took away is that each of these experiences took away time in our headspace, where we could be being a student, being a doctor, and it's something that still affects us and that we have to bring home. It's unacceptable that it's something that we just have to deal with because of who we are.
For me, I think the biggest takeaway was just realizing how, well, every event was unique. I get to relate back to my personal life and think, oh yeah, someone has said something similar to me and how exhausting I was. And like, because of how often they had occurred that I had just forgotten about just because I had bigger vision in prior, like my education and stuff like that.
The two things that struck me watching the video and being in a room where people were watching were, one, the expressions of laughter, even though it's something so serious, because some of the responses that you have during these interactions can be sometimes so ludicrous that it is actually darkly comical. So it was nice that, people, despite the cumulative effects of microaggressions, can still laugh. I also was struck by a sense of hope. So Dr. Thomas is a pediatric intensivist. She went through these experiences through her rotations, and now Malik is currently doing his rotation. And I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but nobody's asked you about being in housekeeping. Why I find this so hopeful is that being brave and entering into these spaces, although these things are cumulative and they're painful, if they're set straight, people behind you don't have to have the same experience again and again and again and again. And that's what struck me, that the participants in this video and the panelists here tonight, by stepping into these spaces, have been so brave and have changed the atmosphere for people coming behind them. So that's exciting. I think she said, oh, can you explain the burden that individuals face in speaking for everyone in their group? The problems with speaking for all. Right.
I feel like it's just you can't speak to, like, your experience is not the same as everybody else that has experienced the same thing. It's just, we are not a monolith. We are we might all be in a different or in a similar racial group, but our life experiences are so vastly different, so it's hard to just speak for one person.
I think what's difficult about that, though, is that we do share some common experiences. We're all sitting here talking about how we've experienced these kinds of interactions, and a lot of us are kind of nodding in affirmation, like, yeah, something like that has happened to me. So it's difficult because I think that there are some common themes that certain groups tend to experience, and it's important that those common themes are understood so that we can explore the reasons why those experiences are common. I think what's difficult is that, as a student, I think, Malik, you were asked to explain why there aren't enough Black people in medical school, right? So, and I laughed out loud because I've been put in similar situations, and I'm sure a lot of us can share that sentiment. But I think there is some value in exploring how certain groups have certain common experiences because of what happens in our environment and what the societal pressures and failings are. But I absolutely agree with you. I don't think any one individual person can be asked to, quote unquote, speak for their people in that way.
Yeah, just from my experience, I think something like 1 in 4 people on this planet are Muslim, which is like a lot of people. Like, I don't know most of them. I know a lot more not. And I'm also Pakistani, so
right.
I fall into the category of like brown town, like South Asian, and then also like when people see Muslim and like a headscarf, they see
Middle Eastern. So
Right,
they,
right.
I feel like I have to represent like India and like
Right.
Bangladesh and Pakistan,
Right.
and then like I don't even know how many like Middle Eastern countries and like whatever else. And that's a lot of countries, and I just feel at times it can be overwhelming because I literally feel like I have to like do certain things right or like overly nice because I'm like representing my people, which is a lot of people. And like for example, like it really depends. Like maybe like if you're not Muslim, you might not have to do this at an airport, but at an airport, I'm like super cute and nice and like smiley, and I'm like so tired. But I just pretend to be like having like the nicest time, and I like say things out loud like, oh, I'm gonna go get these chips now. Like, I'm gonna reach for these chips. You know what I mean? Like, things that are just so frustrating. I just have to, like, make it clear so that the passengers feel safe. Like, I let them know, like, don't worry, I'm one of the good ones. And I'll be, like, really nice when I don't need to be because everyone else looks pretty exhausted on the airplane. So, like, I want to as well. So, and you know what, that's probably a different experience for Malik, for example. Like maybe he needs to, like I've heard from one of my friends, he's a black guy, and he said that like when he goes to for example like a grocery store, he feels like he needs to like dress up more to like look like so that he doesn't look like a threat. And I don't know if you have that experience, but it's certain.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And you know what's ironic? You know what's ironic about the whole thing is like growing up, people will be like I've heard people say like, oh well, if you're walking in a street and on one side of the street there's like a white guy and on the other side of the street it's a black guy, like what side of the street do you choose? I don't know what it is, but growing up as a person of color, I've started to unfortunately have my guard up around people who aren't people of color because I sometimes feel like they don't want me around. So then I'm like, actually, I would choose the other side. And it's like, I don't want to have to choose a side. I just want to walk. But, and I had a conversation with one of my white friends, and she said a similar thing. We were talking about that, and she's like, I would not go on the side. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like when I say it can come out wrong, and like I can be offending someone else, and I don't, that's not what I mean to be doing. But it's just a very, very confusing thing to have to live in this world where you're being fed stereotypes about other people and yourself, and somehow you have to figure yourself out in there.
It almost seems like it becomes about the cumulative microaggression experience instead of an isolated microaggression experience. So we've developed these habits from time again, being in these situations where you feel like you're not wanted or you feel that somebody's assuming something about you. And so in order for you to be looked at in a better light, feel that you need to change your habits, change your words, or speak differently, try to fit into the environment that you're participating in. And it seems also really important that we acknowledge the cumulative experience from when you're very young.
Yes,
and
yes.
You have to feel like you have to become something very dissociated from who you are.
And the other thing too is the fractional nature of it because of all the intersections. So, and Zara, it really struck me when you said it. I am Pakistani. I am Muslim. I am a woman. I am. Like I can come up with at least 10 I ams. And that in each space, in order to avoid these cumulative hits, you have to shift to somehow fit in a space where you're never quite fitting. Can anybody else speak to how intersectionality has impacted or not impacted or what have you, microaggressions in your experience?
Like code switching, kind of, because like the amount of code switching I do, I'm like a pro. I'm in my house, I'm in one country, and I leave the house.
Right, because it's not just one identity that's taking these microaggressions. It's multiple identities because all of us have them. And does anybody have any experiences with that or comments as to how that impacts their their day to day or how it layers on the experiences of microaggressions.
I remember, especially, I moved around a lot as a kid because I was in the military, and being like a first generation immigrant, I always had to not only have to deal with immigrant crimes, but being an immigrant, but I had that on top of being Black in this country. I remember every time I moved, people would make cracks about me being a foreign exchange student. In middle school, there's jokes about me, my family like hunting lions and everything. So it's always just very interesting having to deal with like ignorant stereotypes because I'm from a foreign country, and then on top of that, oh, you look so scary without your glasses on, you know, and stuff like just like minor comments.
Say, you know, I think Dr. James is right, like, you know, everything kind of layers on. So like for me, like as a woman and also an Asian woman, you get comments like, you know, like the other day I introduced myself, like, hi, I'm the med student, I'm coming in to talk to you. And then the patient said, oh, gotta go, my nurse is here. And obviously I just said, I'm the med student, so I'm not the nurse. But, you know, sometimes we hear comments because like I'm an Asian woman, like I was speaking with another female and she is a urologist, and she was telling me about how she was talking to a patient and he was making really vulgar comments to her, fetishizing her for being an Asian woman. So those are kind of things that we deal with.
I actually wanted to ask a little bit, some of these things that we're referring to, we're calling microaggressions, but there actually is a bit of an expansion on the terminology that I wonder if we couldn't address for just a second. Could you read that definition of microaggressions? Because it's the one that's most frequently used, and I think it's a really important concept for people to understand.
I'll read the definition here for microaggression. Brief and commonplace daily verbal behavior and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights or insults.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Yeah, so 3 types fall under microaggression. So micro assault, which there's like this scale, and under micro assaults, it's the more conscious, intentional, and overt.
So I just wanted to interrupt you a second. So to me, the person who says to you, "Oh, did your family hunt lions?"
Yeah,
that's a micro assault, right? Anybody, that's no longer a microaggression.
And I want to go back to what one of the comments were as well. The idea of gaslighting even our own experiences to make it seem less harsh. Because a lot of the things we talk about, as Dr. Thomas, I think, is trying to illustrate, are not microaggressions. Because microaggressions does fall, there is some unconscious, there's an unconscious part of it. But a lot of the things that people tend to brush off as microaggressions are actually micro assaults and bigger problems. But again, we can't function and stop every time something happens because, like you said, you're a medical student, you're a physician, you're a resident, you're an undergrad, like you can't stop. And I think it's important to go through each of these terminology in this setting.
Yes. So, so there's this scale. So on the far left, it's a micro assault, which is the more conscious, intentional, and overt. And then we have on the far right, the micro invalidation. So that's the more unconscious, unintentional, and covert. So, and then in the middle of that, we have the micro insult. So if you can imagine maybe a mix of the two, the more conscious and unconscious. So you've got a little mix where someone may recognize, but not necessarily. So there's actually the few examples. So micro assault on the far left, the more conscious, intentional, overt. So an example is your kind doesn't understand English. So I'm intentionally saying your kind, your race, your ethnicity does not, wherever you come from, does not understand the language of English. So it seems more conscious. And then in the middle, we have the micro insult, being seated in a less desirable location in a restaurant. Someone may seat you in the far back, for example, because of the color of your skin or wearing a hijab. In the far right, where it's the more unconscious, unintentional, and covert, is a micro invalidation. So an example is there is only one race, the human race.
That's so sweet.
I'd like to just bring attention to a more recent comment. Thank you so much.
It's difficult to handle microaggressions when they come from your patients. On one hand, you feel responsible for their care and well-being, and on the other hand, they are trying to undermine your identity. That's a really powerful statement. How have any of you, if we could just get one or two comments, because I wanted to get to the next comment, how have any of you dealt with that tension?
When I was on my emergency medicine rotation, I had a patient who asked, he saw my name badge and saw my first name. I was like, oh, like, where are you from? And I was like, well, I'm Nigerian, but I was born in the States, and kind of gave him the whole song and dance I usually do when that comes up. And he's like, oh, so I told him like, I'm Nigerian. He said, I live in Nigeria, which is not the same country for anyone who may not know their geography. And he was like, oh, I live there. And was like really proud about it and was like, trying to bond. And like, in that situation, because the encounter was over, I was able to just kind of like, okay, well, I'm gonna go get the attending and kind of like gracefully excuse myself from the situation. And then, but I've also had like, not comments, or like, I was talking to a patient and the daughter was telling me about how he likes to eat watermelon, and he like locked eyes with me. And it's one of those things that like, it didn't, no words were said, but it just felt very uncomfortable. And like, I was with the attending, so that's just where it's kind of just had to like, just be quiet and kind of just like take that in so that we could get on with the rest of the encounter so he could go about his day.
And it's really important to acknowledge that discomfort, because that's what happens with that tension. And going back to Krista's comment about taking up the headspace. So now you're dealing with being uncomfortable, and that headspace that you could be donating to coming up with a differential diagnosis, you have to take up acknowledging your discomfort. Does anybody else have any other comments about handling or balancing that tension?
I could talk about that. Actually, Dr. Perry had kind of similar like the question about the hierarchies in healthcare. I think going into third year, again, as a lot of us know, we go into the rotation setting and working with attendings and residents and fellows and things like that. Obviously I was excited. I am excited. It's great. I love it. But I'm going in every day knowing if something happens, if something bothers me, if my attending says something, which attendings already have, or a fellow says something, or a resident says something, I can say something. I know like the school says a lot, you can say something as an anonymous reporting system and all those things, but in reality, when you are the only Black student in the rotation, pretty much the only Black person on the floor, patient or staff otherwise, and you say something, attendings will know who said it, and attendings talk across specialties, and I don't think it's right for me to put my education or my grades at risk in order to help fix a problem that the school should be fixing. It's hard to kind of like have a voice, but at the same time, make sure that I can also get my degree. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to get my degree, and I don't want someone else to experience those things. But at the same time, I think there are too many times when I'm asked to put my education at risk to make the school better. And at the end of the day, I need to also make sure I'm getting the education I need. I don't want the attending to feel comfortable like they can't talk around me, because if I say the wrong thing, then they're going to report me. I just want to make sure I'm not jeopardizing my education that I pay for at the end of the day.
Yeah, like you bring up something. Oh, go ahead.
There's a lot there.
Yeah,
There's a lot to unpack. It's a short meeting, but
like there have been comments that like attendings have made. Like I remember, for example, I had one more rotation, someone kept referring to Black people as like the Blacks, and then and like just like, and it's just very uncomfortable. I remember just like, again like take up that headspace of like, this is awful, and like trying to like, when I was the one doing, it's like, this African American, trying to humanize the language, and the attending just didn't take it. And I felt worried that if I had said something, then everyone would be like, oh, like, be careful what you say, we have the snowflake, and like building a more hostile situation, even though that would be anonymous reporting.
Well, there's a comment from Dr. Perry. Exactly, can always be traced back if you were the only. I do want to though, because I actually find that really that there is a discomfort with, or can somebody continue to comment or expand on the idea of being uncomfortable if other people are uncomfortable and have to watch what they say? I'm curious about that. Like, can we explore that a little bit more? What does that mean? Like, if an attending or a fellow or someone has to check their behavior because, they've, been really offensive and now they're uncomfortable, how does that produce more attention?
It's less of like their discomfort, it's sort of like the way they make it known that they're uncomfortable with the situation. It's more of just like the hostile, oh, I can't say that here, and then they'll give you like a side eye look, or they'll just like make make the atmosphere uncomfortable. So like, at least personally, I don't care that they're uncomfortable. It's more like how they can make me feel more uncomfortable because of their discomfort.
It's interesting because I think about the process by which I've gone from being a medical student to a resident to a fellow to an attending. And at each stage, I felt that I had more agency, so to speak, to handle these kinds of situations when they arose. I distinctly remember feeling as a medical student like there wasn't much I could do. It wasn't the truth because we had, the ability to report. You all have the ability to report. It's on the bottom of every Toledo webpage. Anonymous reporting.
So it's been a lot.
So
Thomas and I are having
we really are. We really are. So the ability to report isn't the issue, but in the moment, before you can get in front of a computer and process what happened and then report, taking time away from studying for your NBME exam, right? Mm-hmm. Because now you have to deal with this. I found that there were certain things that I felt like I could say as a resident that I didn't feel I could say as a student. And as a fellow, I started checking people.
All day.
All day. I distinctly remember checking some nursing staff on some comments that they made about my residents. I get really possessive of my learners. And having to let them know that what they said about them was not appropriate, even when they weren't around. So as an attending, I feel like I have a lot of agency to try and address these issues when they come up. I try to check people when they make comments about patients that are inappropriate, or about students, or about residents, or about anybody else. But I recognize that I have a different authority now than I did when I was a student. And that really has made a difference.
It's interesting too, because I just love this whole idea because oddly enough, I was kind of the opposite. And so the more uncomfortable people felt because I said something, the more I would say it. So, and the concern of, and again, this is not to belittle the actual concern of now I'm going to put my education at risk because we're all here to get a degree and to move on with our with our learning and with our specialties and to be the full expectation of who we are. So when I hear this, it even broadens the perspective even more now being an attending, being careful in certain spaces to make sure that people really, to help promote a real learning environment, that yes, people need to be able to say, even if it's in private, that didn't sit well with me. And as an adult, because we're all adults, what do I have to think about in terms of changing or even thinking about how I may have made somebody uncomfortable in what should be a professional environment?
Right.
And that is self-reflection even in the moment. And I don't think a lot of people feel comfortable self-reflecting and realizing, oh, I'm making someone uncomfortable. And that's unfortunate. To me, it's unfortunate because we're healthcare professionals. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. Self-reflection is important for our profession. And if we don't have the ability to reflect on how we are practicing medicine, whether or not we're doing the right thing for our patients, it means that we may not reach our potential as physicians. And I think that's a really, really important point.
So I think this last comment, because we're 5 minutes before the end of this, and this has been really rich. I think you guys have done a fantastic job. So here's the question though. How do you deal with this in real life? If everybody wants to go around the panel, how do you deal with this in real life? From patients to coworkers, to people you may not even expect. What are some strategies?
Yeah. So like what can lessen the impact of a microaggression when you see it happen? You don't
So for me, I think something that is important is like if there is a resident or an attending or a fellow with me, if they saw what happened, if they were able to debrief with me and be like, hey, that was messed up, like let's talk about this, or like I'll see the patient instead. That would mean a lot to me. So I think that videos like this and talking about these kinds of issues are super important because it raises awareness, hopefully for people that might not know that this is an issue at all, or that these comments are troublesome, I guess. I would be interested to see, like, from a attending's perspective, how you might deal with this. Because, I mean, I would assume that maybe as having coworkers that are equally supportive or people that you can talk to and trust could help you through these times, for sure.
I can go. I think I've learned to preserve my energy for the people who deserve it. And by that, I mean, for example, in the video, the person who asked me that question about the low numbers of African Americans in medical school, I know if they really wanted to find out the answer, they could research it themselves. But when I have friends and coworkers, not work, but like friends and colleagues who actually have a question of curiosity and really want to understand, now I'll take the time to explain it to them. I feel like it's a safe space where it won't come back on me. And I think in the most severe situations, there are different channels to go through. Maybe not the school's channels they're great. They're anonymous. I appreciate them. I'm glad they're there. But I know it from, again, like I said, when you're the only person, you have to maybe talk to an attending that you have more of a relationship with, where you can have more of an open conversation, in order to find a way to get it to the higher ranks and then have the problem be resolved that way, other than maybe the more traditional route. That's what I would do in my situation.
So I don't really know if I have the answer because I think that just from when I realized that I was not like the status quo at like kindergarten till now, I'm just like evolving and learning. When I was like shadowing a doctor, I was probably like 18, 19, and a patient said to me, so are you gonna do any beheadings today? And I just went along with it and I was like, oh no, that's only for Saturdays. And I just like kind of joked around. I was like, oh no, we only do that on Saturdays. And he had like a, like hearty laugh to go with it. And
You want the good ones.
yeah, I'm one of the good ones, right? I'm totally joking. And should have done a wink like I'm not joking to like really freak him out. But it's like, would I react like that now at 24? I don't know if I would. First of all, I would probably assume that I'm being unprofessional because it's also, how do you professionally respond to racism? Because I can very easily see someone saying, well, that was inappropriate, like kind of the like patient is always right type of mentality of professionalism, like you can't say that. So I would probably not say that anymore. But if I did, is it wrong?
And I want
You
to
know?
go back to that because I think the pandemic has uncovered that there's been a lot of abuse in general in healthcare that's been taken for granted. There was a great article, I want to say in the New York Times, that the time for depending on the compassion of physicians, nurses, and the other ancillary specialties is over, and that a lot of the abuses that have happened are now culminating in a pandemic and uncovering systemic problems on top of things like institutionalized racism or gender disparities or socioeconomic disparities. So I think a revolution is happening even in healthcare where, you know what, the patient may be sick, but they're not always right. Your coworker may be misinformed, but they're not always right. And I think we're in the time and sitting in the time where that transition and turnover is happening. So I think that's great that we may not have a solid answer, and I'm really sorry that we don't have a solid answer, but I think strategies of conserving energy and directing it to people and allies who care and building community like we've done tonight are great first starts. And small communities, small specks of light can grow into a tidal wave easily. Little drops of water erode things. And I think this is what we want to do to start gaining momentum. And this is why we created this video, to start this momentum and start this going, to really then build a sense of community here at UT that our learning environment is truly progressive and we mean what we say. But I think that's going to take some time.
I just want to
Sorry, Dr. Thomas.
really quickly, I don't know who asked the question, but it said real life, not when you are protected in your school. And I think, so I guess I'll take this one.
This is a heavy one. Like we can do school, but
Real
I don't know,
life.
real life. It's
Yeah.
dangerous out there.
It
It's
can
dangerous.
be, and to be honest with you, it can be hostile. We all have certain protections from our employers and different things, but at the end of the day, I still have to do my job, whether or not somebody in front of me likes me, whether or not the parent, is willing to hear what I have to say. But I also don't have to take abuse at work. So, it's hard to speak to that in very general terms because every situation is going to be a little different. But there are times where I've told family members who were just completely out of pocket, you know what? I can see that you're upset and I understand that this is a stressful situation having a critically ill child. I'm going to go and let you calm down and then I will come back and we will speak about this again. And I've also told patients who've called me certain names that shouldn't be mentioned that they will not talk to me like that again. So, and usually that has snapped people out of whatever it is. It doesn't happen all the time. Again, we're talking about, at that point, that's a macro assault. Exactly. There's nothing micro about that, right?
It's not even a micro.
It's not even micro.
Security.
And again, if you're dealing with macro assaults, you can call security. And
Correct.
that's a thing.
Correct.
I've told people flat out, like, I'm happy to care for you, but you will not speak to me like that again. And that's okay. And there are other times where, I have to deal with it a little bit more gently and it just depends. But you don't have to be abused because you're still a human being. And I think it's important to remember that even if it's real life and you're not protected by your school, you're still a human being who doesn't have to be abused while you're trying to do your job. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. For you guys who are still in medical school, be kind to yourselves. And I think, just understand, like Dr. Jenkins said, you are powerful and you are not alone.
I think that's a great way to end our conversation tonight. It's only been an hour, and of course, Dr. Jenkins, we have depended on your words to help us bring this to a close. Thank you all so much. I can't say, like, my heart is so full of gratitude from James Molnar for helping us put this together, from the panelists. I really wish we could acknowledge the other video participants who were unable to make it and participate in the panel tonight. Their stories are amazing. And most of all, I want to thank the audience. We really appreciate you taking your time tonight. You are a change maker. Whether you have experienced a microaggression or even had somebody experience a microaggression from you, the whole idea that you would come out tonight to confront this and look at it and turn it over and talk about it with us makes you a change maker. And each of us will continue to chip away at this until it's done. And so we're full, and I hope you are too. And I hope this overflows and the conversations continue. And let us know, give us feedback if this is something where we can continue or provide more content, because we have the talent and the people to do it. So thank you so much, everyone. Dr. Jenkins, I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to say before we sign off.
Thank you very much. This is a necessary conversation. I am just so proud to be a part of a project like this. And these are not their stories over there. These are our stories. This is us. And it takes a lot of courage to speak up and use your voice in this way and to lean into these difficult and painful conversations. So thank you.
All right. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Good night, everyone.